Lately, my neighbors haven't been the same. They used to smile, laugh, and be a generally normal couple. Now they don't do any of those things. Just to add some backstory, Sean and Ellie Carpenter moved into the neighborhood on July 14th, 2014. Me and my wife, Elizabeth, had been one of the first people to meet them. They were very nice. 2 days after they moved in, we were invited to their house for tea. We accepted the invite. Ellie made tea for the 3 of us, plus herself. Once it was done, her and Elizabeth went into the living room, while myself and Sean sat in the kitchen and talked. I learned that me and Sean liked a lot of the same things: football, similar shows, rock music, and video games, just to name a few. An hour into our conversation, and Elizabeth tells me we have to go to Tesco, which is the UK version of Walmart, for those of you who don't know, and that I needed to go with her. I asked if I could stay and continue my conversation with Sean, since she did interrupt us, but she said I needed to come with her for some dumb reason that I can't remember. Believe me, I love my wife dearly, but I swear, some of the shit she does is questionable. So I had to leave. I said bye to Sean and thanked Ellie for the nice tea, and then we left. For the next 3 years, we continued our friendship with the Carpenters. Myself and Sean went to football games together, played Halo on the Xbox, and listened to music, all whilst Ellie and Elizabeth talked about gossip and some shit in the living room. I'd like to say that we continued our friendship into our elderly years, and then we died and were buried next to each other, and we lived happily ever after. But that wasn't the case. Unfortunately, because something unusual happened. It was the 3rd of March, 2017. Myself and Elizabeth were heading over to the Carpenters because they had invited us the previous day. But we declined due to some personal reasons. So we were making it up to them. We knocked on the door and they opened it. The first sign that something was wrong was when Sean didn't say his usual, "How are you guys doing this fine evening?" No, he just said, "Welcome." Before he and Ellie beckoned us into the house, myself and Sean headed into the kitchen, while Elizabeth and Ellie went into the living room. I tried to make conversation with Sean, but he remained silent. He did do some strange things, like he licked my face and then poked my cheeks. It was very unsettling. And then he stared at me, the way people would stare at a ghost if they encountered it for the first time. His eyes were open wider than I had ever seen them. I cannot tell you how hard it was to avoid looking at the eerie gaze for half an hour. At certain times, he would give me a look, and then just grin. 30 minutes after arriving, my wife said we had to go, but this time, I didn't argue. We said goodbye to them, but they didn't say anything. They just kept staring at us until we left. Even though my wife said we had to go somewhere, we were in fact just going home. Apparently, Ellie had been creeping out my wife, just like Sean. So, after putting up with her for 30 minutes, she decided she wanted to leave. That night, Elizabeth was upstairs taking her makeup off, and I was downstairs listening to some scary true stories in the kitchen, while washing the dishes and cleaning the floor. At one point, I decided to look out the window, and I saw something that, to this day, I can't get out of my head. It was Ellie and Sean. They were sitting at their kitchen table, just staring at me, their eyes showing little to no emotion. I was severely creeped out, but I didn't mention it to my wife because I didn't want to scare her. So we got into bed and talked for a bit and then went to sleep. I woke up at 4 in the morning to the sound of Elizabeth's horrific screams from downstairs. I got my baseball bat and ran as fast as I could. I found Elizabeth on the floor, just crying. When I asked her what was wrong, she simply said, "Look out the window." I looked out the window and saw Ellie and Sean still staring. But this time, they were smiling, the most unsettling smiles I've ever seen. I decided sometime the next day, I needed to go to Sean's house to question him about all this bizarre shit that they were doing lately. The next day, after lunch, I went over to Sean and Ellie's house. I just wanted an explanation for what had been happening. But, of course, I didn't get one. I walked to the front door and knocked. But they didn't answer. After waiting on the stoop for around 10 minutes, I decided to check the door to see if it was unlocked. It was unlocked. I decided to let myself in. I went in and found something unexplainable. Everything in the house was gone. The tables, the pictures, the chairs, the TV, even the wallpaper was gone. Everything was gone upstairs as well. Their beds had vanished. The toilet had disappeared. Everything was gone. I decided to still not tell my wife, and I went home. The next morning after breakfast, I looked out the kitchen window, where I had a clear view of the carpenter's kitchen, and I felt physically ill. The kitchen was the same as it usually was. Nothing was out of place. I told my wife I forgot something at their house, and I wanted to get it back. I left to go to the carpenter's residence. I knocked on the door and Ellie answered. I told her I had left a video game in their house and wanted to get it back. She nodded her head and let me in the house. I didn't really forget anything. I just wanted to see if everything was still missing. But sure enough, it had all returned. The portraits were back, the TV had returned, everything was back to normal. Not a single thing was out of place. I told Ellie I couldn't find what I was looking for, then left. Now, here's my theory. Sean and Ellie must have been kidnapped and replaced with clones. Now, I know that seems a bit far-fetched, but this is the only explainable theory I could come up with. The change of their personalities, and how it was so sudden. And if my theory is correct, who could have kidnapped them? The only thing I can't explain is their house being empty that one day, and then it being back to normal the next. If any of you have any theories on what happened, I'd love to know. All I know is my neighbors are acting really strange lately, and I honestly don't want to be friends with them anymore. We may even have to move. Who knows? For now, I don't want anything to do with Sean and Ellie Carpenter. I think that might be the best thing for now.